I'm Margaret Carrero, and I'm a biology teacher who's had a long-term interest in gardening and native plants. I actually started in the backyard because it's a more private space, and if you're going to experiment, sometimes it's easier for your neighbors and yourself to experiment in the backyard rather than the front yard. Well, this section of my garden, which will be in riotous bloom sometime in June and July, is the section of my garden where I have a lot of prairie plants. And you might say, prairie plants? Why would you grow prairie plants in your garden? Well, it's because I have really bad soil. What the nice thing about a lot of native plants is they really don't want rich soil. And they can take clay, especially these prairie plants, which once they get going, make the longest roots, break up that clay, and make good soil down there after a few years. So here's where I have a section of the garden where the soil is the poorest. It is a hard-packed clay, which I know just about everybody in Louisville knows about, but also has the added problem of a lot of rocks and a chalk layer in some sections that is about 5 inches thick, about a foot down, and it can kill some of my plants, I've discovered through trial and error. Considering the soil and what kind of soil you have is the second most important factor after what kind of sun and light you have in choosing which plants to grow, particularly native plants. So what you're seeing here right now is my 3-year-old trumpet or coral honeysuckle, which is blooming great guns right now. I'm so pleased, and it's just ready and waiting to entice the hummingbirds, which should be arriving very soon. That's the nice thing about native plants. They bloom in time for the birds that are migrating and for butterflies and other things that when they're migrating. Well, here is a coral honeysuckle, but the yellow variety. It's only 1 year old. It's kind of thin and looking kind of mangy at the moment, but it will get as thick or thicker than that other one you just saw. But I chose the yellow because I really thought this yellow would look great with the blue flowers of this native Amsonia. I just like the color combination. Well, here is the shade end of my garden, and it is filled with native plants that are commonly seen in our forest woodlands in the forest floor. This plant, which is just starting to bloom, is called the great waterleaf. It is one of my favorites. It will naturalize in your garden. That means it will reseed, and it'll probably reseed where it wants to, but it's easy enough for you to transplant it where you'd like later, and it blooms in its second year but makes lovely foliage. Over here you see our wild geranium, and I have a lot of it in my garden, and it's one of my favorites. It brings in lots of bees. Here, as a great ground cover in a shade garden, is wild ginger. Now this one, to see the flowers, you have to get pretty up close and personal. With wild ginger, you have to work a little bit. You got to look under the leaves for the flowers. They are ant and fly pollinated, not bee pollinated, but they have a pretty geometry inside that I just love taking photographs of. Next to this patch of wild ginger, there's one of my favorites, our wood poppy or Celandine poppy. It also is a great naturalizer, and I just love it in the garden. It pops up in all kinds of places, and sometimes you say, hey, that was a better decision than I could have made.